Okay, so nutrition this week or today, what we're going to be covering is nutrition is always such a wide and broad spectrum of things. So it's hard to always pinpoint and talk about one specific thing because we could go over and over and over it a million times. So what we're going to do is just break things into as little bite-sized bits as possible, so that it's easier for you to remember and understand. And sometimes it might feel repetitive, it might feel like we're always talking about the same thing, but actually, in a world and a space where there's so much bullshit, it's actually really important just to stick to the key things and decide what's best for you. So today, what we're going to do is just cover the basics of a protein, a carbohydrate, and a fat, and actually what you should be picking for you and your goals. So it's kind of more like the macro space and then allowing you to pick what's best for you. Um, and again, I've gone into protein, carbohydrates, and fats in like really big detail before, but I think keeping it simple is going to be key because I understand that 90% of people just don't care what a protein is. So we'll keep it nice and simple. Obviously, we've all seen this picture before. It's the Eat Well guide, and it's always good to start off with the person who's just looking for general health. Okay, we're not really looking towards any goals. We just want a better, more sustainable lifestyle. And again, whenever we talk about nutrition, because we're in the UK, we refer to the NHS and what they say. Now we're going to look at what is recommended versus what might we actually do in a gym setting. But for the general population, obviously, we want to get as much fruit and veg in as possible. You can have your carbs, making sure it's the whole wheat carbs rather than the processed, most of the time, white stuff. So, like white bread, white rice, trying to stay away from stuff like that and going more towards the whole grain and the brown rice and the brown bread, because that's much better for us and has much higher fiber, which is actually more helpful for our health and actually our eating habits. Then obviously we've got our protein and our dairy, and most of that will just be all consumed into dairy protein. So that's kind of what your plate should be looking like. That's literally, you pop your plate on the table. That's pretty much what it should be looking like. Again, it's always important just to cover that and give a visual representation of that. Now we're going to look at what it might look like in a gym. So first of all, we'd go in kind of like number of importance, and protein is always the number one most important thing to prioritize. Now, I know it gets really boring, and again, it's one of those things that is really competitive, repetitive, because it's like, oh, everyone always bangs on about protein. But why do we bang on about protein? Is because the more protein you have, you're talking about muscle recovery. We're talking about keeping yourself full and satiated. It's such a key like micronutrient that so far protein is the one macronutrient that doesn't really impact or have a major defect on health. So if you talk about too many carbs, then we're talking about insulin spikes. Too much fat, we're talking about things like heart disease. Whereas protein, it does its thing really well and it doesn't really have an impact. Maybe if you struggle with liver, you may struggle with high protein diets. But again, the research still isn't quite there to suggest that. So at the minute, your best bet and like what your safest is and what you're safe over consuming on is protein. So that's why it's the number one factor. Whereas the others always have a knock-on effect, or there's a cost to having more of the other ones. So for a healthy lifestyle, we recommend 0.8 grams per kg of body weight. And for an active lifestyle, so for us that go to the gym, we work out 3 times a week, it'd be anywhere between 1.2 and 2.2 grams. You would definitely be aiming more towards the 2.2 if you were a new gym goer. So let's say you're in the first 4 weeks of your journey lifting weights, you would need a much higher demand of protein because your body's not used to that demand and that repair and that recovery. And then as you get a little bit more experience, you can then drop down to that 1.2. So literally in a normal world, what you do is you'd get your calculator, you would get your measurement in kg, you would then times it by the number that kind of suits you. So again, for us, let's just say, for me personally, 90 kg, I don't think I am, but whatever, 90 times 2.2, and then my protein goal for the day would be 198 grams of protein. And then I would times that by four, and then that's how many calories I would have, which would be about 800 calories would be towards protein. Again, there's no knock-on effect or cost of having high protein diet. That's why we prioritize that first. Then what we would do, oh, sorry. So what does that look like? And again, we always say things, and I think this is probably like the key thing here, is what does that actually look like? What does a high protein diet look like for a gym person versus what would it look like for a normal person? So a normal person or for a healthy lifestyle, 80 grams of protein would look like three scrambled eggs, 200 grams of Greek yogurt, 100 grams of chicken breast, and then 100 grams of another meat. It doesn't have to be salmon, but most meats have about the same amount of protein in. So that's what an 80-gram diet would look like. When you start to hit the 220 grams is when you start having six scrambled eggs. With that Greek yogurt, you have a scoop of whey protein to fortify it and make it high protein. You would have 200 grams of portions of meat rather than 100 grams. Things like cans of tuna, things that are just high in protein, that's easy to snack on. That's the difference between the 80 grams and a healthy lifestyle and 220 and being on this routine where you're consistently growing and repairing muscle. So you can see some of the differences there and where you'd make some adjustments. For the yogurt or the snack, you'd be adding some whey protein. For your meat portions, you'd be doubling it and having more. So that's what the difference is there. Then we go on to carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are an energy source or the body's preferred energy source, but not the only. So for a sedentary lifestyle, maybe you work from home, you're chilling, you're sitting, I would definitely aim more towards the 2 grams per kg of body weight. For an active lifestyle, we look at anywhere between 3 and 5 grams per kg of body weight. And I think what was important and what I really want to start touching on and getting people to trial out is a weight loss or a keto or a low carb diet, especially if you're someone who works from home. If you're in a quite an active job and an active role, you may well need a few more carbohydrates. But if you're working from home, you don't really do a lot of movement, you might go to the gym and that might feel like you're doing a lot. But actually, if you're not out and about and walking around, you're still pretty much sedentary. Like you're not doing a lot of activity. So you probably don't need many carbs because you're not fueling the body for activity or exercise. So, for example, if you're 100 kg, your consumption would be about 2 to 300 grams. And then for the weight loss, if you're focused on weight loss, keto, then it would be under 50 grams. So again, what does that look like? What would that be in terms of a diet? Because it's all well and good saying, oh, 50 grams, 300 grams, but what does that look like for you? So 50 grams, or if you're doing like a keto diet or focusing on weight loss, it would be your carbohydrates wouldn't come if you look at the 300 grams, it wouldn't come from things like oats. It wouldn't come from rice. It wouldn't come from wraps or sweet potatoes. Your carbohydrates would come from things like avocados, almonds, spinach, peanut butter, asparagus, things that you wouldn't typically say were correlated with carbohydrates, but will provide you with that carbohydrate source. Most of those things you'd look at and you would associate with healthy fats. But actually, that's the difference between the high carb diet and the low carb diet is that you're still getting the carbohydrates from the fats, but you're not prioritizing the things like the rice, the wheats, and the sweet potatoes where you get majority of that from. So if you are looking for weight loss and you're looking at keto and you're not kind of majorly active and you're not needing to fuel the body, then the 50 grams of carbohydrates would be quite a good idea. And just to trial it out, see how it goes. But if you are more active and you are doing kind of a lot more activity throughout the day, then the 300 grams wouldn't be unreasonable to ask, depending on how your body reacted and how you felt. So things like oats, bananas, brown rice, wraps, sweet potatoes, because you need to fuel the body. And if you're feeling lethargic, low on energy, you're struggling with day-to-day activities, then maybe look at your carbohydrates. Also look at your water consumption, but maybe you're not fueling your body if you're doing enough. Um, so that's carbohydrates. Then we go on to fats. So if again, we're going on to that health and then that weight loss balance. So for health, we always recommend about 20 to 35 grams, 30% of our calories. So if you're someone who has 2,500 calories a day, then a 35% intake would be about 97 grams of fat. And for weight loss or keto, it'd be about 150 or 208. And again, so this is what every diet pretty much revolves around is high or low fats, high or low carbohydrates. Protein always stays the same. And again, it's because there's no impact, there's no cost to having too much protein, but there is to fats and carbohydrates, and that's just what you need to be aware of. But we'll cover that on a different day. For right now, what we'll do is just focus on the weight loss side, where you have more fats, less carbs, And for health, you would just have a balance of the two. So what does that look like again? So for 97 grams of fat, again, you'll start to see some correlations now. The free scrambled eggs, you would also be having with your protein. Okay, cool. Your peanut butter, you would also be doing that for protein. Your almonds, your olive oil, and your salmon. So again, it pretty much fits into somewhat of a balanced diet. Again, it wouldn't be unreasonable to kind of be on that 97 grams of fat. That's a pretty much standard diet, and it's a balanced diet. The 200 grams is where you need to increase, and you're on lower carbohydrates because if you're having high fats and high carbohydrates, then it's not looking pretty. Maybe you're on a weight gain journey, and I think this is going to be the key, and this is where high fats come into play. Is actually where you start to fortify foods. So what you see is you're still having the free scrambled eggs, but what you're doing is you're having butter and cheese with it, which is dense, easy to consume foods that are really dense in calories and fat. The things like butter and cheese, high in fat, easy to consume. You'd be putting that all over the scrambled eggs. Your avocados, again, healthy fat, nuts, healthy fats, easy to consume. You could go through a bag of nuts and you'd be on probably like 2,000 calories. So you have to be really careful with that. Steak with butter, so the fortification of butter rather than just the steak by itself. And I think that's why I highlighted things like sauces, butters, and spreads, is because actually, if you're not having any carbohydrates, then you need to prioritize and fortify the food with those high butters or sauces. Because what your plate would look like is a couple of vegetables, maybe like some sticks of asparagus, a steak, and then maybe like a scrambled egg or something. To get that higher fat content, you would need the butter in that. So then what now? So that pretty much wraps up this Zoom because what I want you to start to think about, maybe calculate your protein target, maybe calculate how many carbs you think you want, or calculate what your fat should look like, especially when we kind of reflect back and compare the two different types of diets. So what the higher versus the lower version looks like. What do you think is achievable for you? Being able to stomach 220 grams of protein wouldn't be considered normal for most people. So maybe that 80 grams is a safe place for you. And also remember that at the end of the day, no matter what micronutrient or macronutrient you pick, there's always going to be an element of shuffling. So if you do have less protein, you're still going to need calories from somewhere. So maybe you have a balanced protein approach, and then you need a balanced fat and a balanced carbohydrate. If you have higher protein, then something else needs to drop. So that might be lower carbohydrates, that might be lower fat. Okay, because at the end of the day, they're all calories still. So you need to think about that when you're deciding. But again, see what kind of compares for you. We've talked about what you might need or what that would look like. And again, it's about building independence for yourself. We have calorie targets, you have protein goals, you have, your macros that you need to hit and what you should aim towards, but actually start to think about these foods and what, the plates look like, what the day looks like in terms of meal planning and meal prepping. What types of food can you have? Some of these are pretty basic, and I've used some of the same examples across all the macronutrients. Um, but start to identify where that fits in on your diet and if there's anything missing for you. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up this one. Hopefully that helps. And then the thing is like, what now? So if you want to be proactive, if you want to start doing stuff, if you don't know already, if you don't know off the top of your head what your protein goal is, get your calculator out and find it out. Do it now. Always have that on your mind. That's your number one priority is hitting that protein target because again, everything else kind of ticks along, especially when we're looking at, building muscle, going to the gym and recovery. So you're able to perform at your best every single day. Find out your protein goal and actually use this and put this in place. So this has been pre-recorded. I know that this is a time that's probably not typically always available for everyone. But it was the time that was voted in the group. So if it needs changing, that can always be done. Hopefully this has helped and gave some sort of insight. And again, as the weeks go on, we'll break down more into kind of what different diets and that look like. And if there's any questions that comes up, we can tackle those. But I think for today, it was just good to have a perspective. So hope that helped. Thank you for joining, and we'll wrap that one up there. Thanks.